Hello everyone and welcome to the Bearded Geeks, the weekly grab bag of topics covering movies, comics, video games and TV. My name is Jages, I am the Beard Master, and today I'm really excited to talk about this movie, but at the same time, I'm kind of nervous because I saw Mandy and I really liked it. And we're going to get into it, we're going to go deep into it, but normally I'll see a flick and I'll do a solo show and, you know, we'll just do a, like, inverted commas review of it. You know, we'll talk about, you know, the story and the characters, the visuals, you know, all the other stuff that goes into these movies, and I'll slap a rating on the end. But Mandy was such a different experience, and there's so much, like, symbolism and subtext and that in this movie. I've been picking it apart for days, and what I really kind of want to do today, I kind of want to do kind of a review, but I also want to do kind of a bit of an analysis and kind of just give you my personal interpretation of the movie, how I interpret it as I was watching it and through, you know, subsequent, you know, thought after I've unpacked it after a few days and stuff. And so I kind of want to do that. So I'm a little bit nervous to do it because, you know, but it's really just my thoughts and I just want to share them with you guys. So, straight up, we will say, if you haven't seen Mandy with Nicolas Cage, this show is going to be full spoilers. We're going absolute, full, to-the-wall spoilers on this show. So, if you haven't seen it, go away, watch it, come back, and listen to this show after you've seen it, because I do not want to ruin any of this for you. I really don't. I want you guys to experience this for yourselves, because that's what this movie really is. It is an experience. You have to sit down and just watch this movie and take it in and just experience it, because it's so different and different to anything that you'll probably watch this year, as it was for me while I was watching it. But I really enjoyed this flick, so let's get into it. So if we're going to start off just talking in flat movie terms, if we were just going to start it off like a base review, what's this movie about? Let's break it down. Mandy is about Nicolas Cage, who plays Red Miller, and Andrea Riseborough, who plays the titular Mandy Bloom. And they're a couple. Not really specifically said if they're husband and wife, although there is a character that says hubby in the movie. But, you know, they're a couple. Mandy and Red are a couple. They live this idyllic little existence in the woods, in the Shadow Mountains, in this little house. And long story short, hippie cult leader takes a fancy to Mandy, kidnaps her, Mandy dies, Nicolas Cage gets really angry and goes on a revenge trip for the rest of the movie to murder the rest of the cult that took his lady love. So, when you break it down to base, it's really just a revenge flick. So, guy and girl gets kidnapped, girl's killed, guy goes on revenge trip, murders everyone, end of movie. So, it's the base plot couldn't be simpler. It's absolute bare bones based plot. But I hear you guys out there and you're like, Jags, I've seen the trailer and there's some weird trippy shit in this trailer. Tell me about it. Right, I'm going to tell you. Let's go through the movie beat by beat. Like I said, full spoilers. We're going full to the wall spoilers. So Nicolas Cage plays Red, who, for lack of a better way, is not really forefrontally explained, but from all the hints and that we get in the flick, in the opening, we find out that we can surmise that Red is a reformed alcoholic. So he's given up alcohol. He lives with Mandy. Mandy works as a cashier down at the local store shop. And in her spare time, she's also an artist. She does a lot of high concept and elaborate fantasy art. Very sort of Frank Frazetta, really. She's into metal, obviously. She's a very independent person. She wears a lot of metal t-shirts. She reads a lot of fantasy novels and stuff. And you can tell just by looking at her, she's had a hard life, you know. She's had a rough past. She has a scar, a very light scar running down under her left eye, down her left cheek. And, you know, you can tell the way that Andrea plays it, she's a lovely girl and she just has like this radiant beauty about her, but you can tell there's a little bit of damage under the surface, and there's a little bit of sadness there because of that as well. Red and Mandy live together. It's the kind of couple where they just complete each other. It's like two people with issues have just come together and they've made each other better for it. and they're really in love. It really sells it, like, in the beginning of the film, the first half of the film, their relationship. And you can tell they're totally enamored with each other, and they're totally in love, and they're happy in their little recluse existence they have, living in this house in the middle of the woods, which has no walls, really. All the walls are just all window panes. It's all glass. And we'll get into this a bit later, but I feel in a way that ties back to their relationship as well. So, Mandy's out walking one day, and the van goes driving past, which is full of this hippie Jesus freak cult, which they're described in the film. They're called the Children of the New Dawn, and their leader is Jeremiah Sand, and he sees Mandy walking down the road, and immediately he takes a fancy to her, and he decides that he wants her. So he calls in kind of his first lieutenant, or his kind of number 2 in the cult, and he gives him the Horn of Abraxas, and he wants him to summon someone. And we feel like it's kind of starting to get into the supernatural kind of as well, because it like, take the Horn of Abraxas. And, it's they need a sacrifice. It's blood for blood, sacrifice. And you're like, okay, are they going to summon, like, demons? Is that where this is going? So they go out into the sticks. The guy blows the horn. And then after a little bit, this demon biker gang arrives. And they look like the Cenobites from Hellraiser fell into the world of Mad Max. They're all black, burnt leather, real disgusting goo covered, horrible things, kind of like shrouded in darkness. You don't really see too much of them, but they look awful. They look terrible, and they all turn up on their bikes, and they enlist these guys to capture Mandy. So Mandy is captured, taken to Jeremiah, and then Mandy is drugged by 2 of Jeremiah's female kind of cohorts. She's drugged, they give her LSD, and they pull out like this massive, it looks like some kind of fantasy wasp or beetle. They pull it, it's massive, it's like the size of your hand. They pull it out of a jar, and it stings Mandy, and the kind of the matriarch of the women, the cult ladies, says that, I call that the cherry on top, on top of the drugs that you're already having. And then it goes into kind of like a hallucinatory, drug-fueled look. The film changes, the color changes, all the movements are like shadowy and like faces left behind, it's kind of like a sleepy daze you're in, And then Jeremiah tries to woo Mandy. You spoke to me, I heard you. You didn't say anything, but I heard you. And then he tries to woo her, playing some of his own music. It turns out that Jeremiah is not just like a cult leader, he's a failed folk musician. He actually says to Mandy, do you like the Carpenters? He's like, I think that they're sensational, but this is even better. And he plays this record, and it's this song he did years earlier. And the song is about him. It's very self-absorbed. He's singing about himself. Jeremiah Sand is a righteous man. And then he kind of goes like full Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, and he opens his robe and he exposes himself to her, and he's just like, let's get lost in it. And then Mandy asks me, even though she's kind of in a drug-fueled daze, is this your song? Did you create this song? And is it about you? And after he confirms yes to 2 of those things, she laughs in his face. And for a split second, he thinks it's kind of funny, and then he's just like, he just loses. He's like, don't laugh at me. And Jeremiah being rejected by Mandy doesn't take it very well, because Jeremiah is incredibly egocentric, but we'll get to that later. So after this, they put Mandy in a bag and they take her out in front of Red, who's chained up, with barbed wire around the wrists, and he has like barbed wire around his mouth, like between his teeth. And then Jeremiah stabs Red in the ribs, and they set Mandy on fire and burn her alive in front of Red. Afterwards, they leave. Red manages to escape out of the chains, and he crawls over to what's left of Mandy's body, and it's literally just like a pile of ashes, but you see her head, like, visibly. It's just ash. And he picks it up and holds it, and then the wind blows it all away, and it falls to pieces. It's kind of Terminator 2-ish. And then after this, we go into what I think is the best scene in the film. Red goes into their bathroom, and he's in like his tighty-whities, his shirt, and he's like covered in blood. And he goes into the bathroom and he rifles through the drawers and he pulls out this bottle of vodka. Obviously, it's a bottle he's had hidden in the back, or, you know, reformed alcoholic, I guess, maybe. It was always just a bit of a safety net he had, or maybe Mandy hid it from him. So in this scene, we see Nick Cage go through the ultimate, like, gambit of emotions, like, just dealing with what has happened to Mandy. Like, the love of his life is just, she's gone. She's been murdered by these nut cult. And he starts to drink this vodka, and he's just screaming and just roaring at the top of his lungs, and he drinks more vodka, and it's getting to the point where he's just downing it, and you can see it's starting to, like, the way Cage plays it, the vodka's starting to burn his throat, but he doesn't care. He just keeps drinking, and he's holding his throat, even though it's burning his throat so much. He's pouring it on his wrists and on his wounds and on his ribs where he's been stabbed, and he sits on the toilet, and he just roars and yells, and man, it's pretty powerful. It's pretty intense, and then he just switches into sadness and begins to cry, and the whole time the camera's kind of like creeping in, you know, as things start to happen, and then it's like us, the viewer, you know, the camera kind of retreats just a little bit before it starts to dolly in again. And man, like, Nick Cage should get some, like, recognition just for this scene alone, because, man, he goes the full gambit of emotions in this. After that, we move into the revenge, thriller, horror side, and Nick Cage goes back to Bill Duke, who's one of his old mates, to pick up his crossbow. Bill Duke fills him in and tells him that the biker gang are called the Black Skulls. They were formerly drug couriers, and they used to transport drugs for the chemist, as he's called. But the chemist didn't really like, or he took a bit of a dislike to the gang, and he cooked them up a bad batch of LSD, I believe. You know, after they took in this tainted and, like, super highly concentrated, like, batch of LSD, it turned them, like, insane. It turned them, like, into insane sadomasochists. And it's pretty fucked up, some of the shit you see him do in the movie. Especially one of them, one of the Black Skull guys is called Fuck Pig in the credits. You'll see that in the movie. It's pretty intense. And then Nick Cage goes and forges, like, this big fuck-off axe with, like a dagger blade on the end, but it's kind of like a pickaxe on the back end as well. It's like this super versatile weapon. It looks something straight out of, like a heavy metal album or a fantasy novel or some kind of high fiction. It's kind of like this high concept axe. It's insane. And then from there, we get Nick Cage going through, killing all the members of the Black Skulls and making his way through until he eventually gets to Jeremiah Sand, who he deals with, and then we get to the end of the film. Now, if you've got this far, hopefully you've already seen the film and you know what's entailed. So we can probably skip over a lot of me explaining, you know, the end shot of the film, where it's like it's kind of like a forest, but then it's like a lunar landscape with like jagged rocks and cliffs and two giant planets in the background before the movie ends. This movie, for anyone who watches it, is really going to be on one of two sides of the fence. Either you're absolutely going to love it, or you're going to think it is the worst thing you've ever seen, and you'll never want to watch it again. You can't believe you sat through 10 or 20 minutes of it. Because from what I'm seeing, it's totally polarizing. You either love it or you hate it. It's getting 5 stars or it's getting 1 star. It's getting 0 stars even. Because it is for an average film goer who just wants to see a Nick Cage kind of action horror movie thing. It's pretty out there. I mean, you're probably not going to get into it. Like, when I was watching it, the movie is like a film of 2 halves. So, like, the first half kind of sets up the relationship between Mandy and Red, and it's very slowly paced. It's very methodical. It's like being in a dream and on drugs, and it's so hard to explain. You know, people throw around the word fantasmagorical. It's literally that. Apply that word to this movie, fantasmagorical. It's out there. It's too different for people, probably. The first half, it's going to be too much. But in the second half, you get into the revenge stuff. So you get into all the action, you get into all the murdering, and Nick Cage just being crazy Nick Cage. And when I was first watching this movie, my first sitting, which was only a few days ago, I was watching it and I'm like, the first half for me at the time, it was slow. I'm like, oh man, this is like really slow. This is really taking a long time to get anywhere. And by the halfway point, Mandy is killed. And then the title of the movie jumps in. You know how you watch a movie for like a couple of minutes and it'll have like a little opening scene and then it'll be like, bah, and it'll show the title of the movie and then it'll get into it. This shows the title of the movie well past the halfway mark. It's just under 2-hour film. The title card is probably, I timed it, I looked at it earlier today, it's like 1 hour 14. And the movie only goes for like 1 hour 58 minutes. So it's pretty out there. But that's not a bad thing. I mean, we talk about so much that there are no original ideas out there. And it kind of threw me for a loop a little bit while I was watching it. But I want to preface that I absolutely love this movie. I really love the shit out of it. When I finished watching it, I was like, you know what? That movie for me, just as a film, as I've just watched it without going any deeper on the surface level, for me personally, who's normally into this kind of stuff, this is probably like a 3.5, maybe pushing a 4. Just as a film, as a regular, sit down, watch a film, let's not go any deeper, just what I've seen, 3.5, maybe 4 out of 5. And that kind of disappointed me because I really enjoyed the trailer and I really enjoyed a lot of the creative decisions in this movie because, fuck me, this is probably one of the most creative movies you'll see this year. I don't know, whether you like it or you hate it, I mean, try not to watch this movie just on a surface level. Try to delve deeper because that's where I've had the most fun. Like, I watched this movie and yeah, just as that base movie, 3.5, 4 out of 5, maybe. But since then, because there's so much symbolism and underlying subtext in this movie, these are the things I love about these kinds of films. I like being challenged by a movie. I like not knowing everything or hearing a name, like Abraxas in the movie, and I'm like, maybe that's got like some deeper meaning. Let me look that up. That may see how that ties into the film, you know? I like doing that. I like watching a film and going away and researching about it. And normally, if there's a movie I really want to see, obviously I don't watch any reviews or any spoilers or anything like that. But after I saw the film, I'm like, I really want to see what other people thought of this film, how they interpret it. Because, you know, each person that watches anything, you know, they can interpret things so many different ways. And we're going to get to my interpretation in a few minutes. But I love seeing how other people interpret these kinds of films. Like Enemy, for example. Like how my interpretation compared to someone else's. So I love hearing so many different opinions. And then going from there, you know, because I'm not, there's some religious subtext in that, and imagery and symbolism and that in this film. Now, I'm not the most religious person, I've never have been, so I kind of know like base stuff about religion. If I need to know anything, I need to dive deeper and do more research for myself. Whereas someone who is more religious, you know, has been their entire life, they'll tend to easily see these things more, and a lot easier than I would. So I love hearing things from different sides of the fence. And they're my favourite kinds of films. I love to go away and do research about films. I really do. I love to delve deeper. And that's what I did with this film, because there is so much in this film for you to chew on. Like, alright, let's start at the top. Now, at the beginning of the film is really based on Red and Mandy and their relationship. It's setting up these two characters. Now, I mentioned their relationship, and it's like these two people from damaged backgrounds or troubles and adversities they've sort of overcome, you know, but then they find each other and they help each other, you know, take it further and overcome it, become better people. And, you know, they're the yin and the yang, you know, to each other. They fit together and they work together and they give each other strength and courage, and they just make each other better, you know? When they feel like they're going to sink, these people help us float. And so I felt like, in my personal opinion, when I was watching the film, because, like I said before, there are so many amazing and different creative decisions made in this movie. Like, if you had to give this, like, a mark out of 100 for creativity, you probably have to give it 150, because there are so many, like, daring and creative choices. When I was watching it, I felt like when Mandy and Red were together and they were interacting, there were a lot of color choices. Mandy and Red, there's a scene where they're in bed and they're talking to each other and they have a conversation about planets. Let's talk about Mandy and Red just a little bit first. Mandy, to me, she was obviously a woman with a troubled past. She tells us about it in the film. Mandy, to me, she felt like Mandy represented, like, she was like a symbol of purity, you know, or of all that is good, you know, being in touch with nature because she lived in the woods, or even perfection, you know. She was like this angel, you know, on earth, you know. She's had a hard life, but she just had like this inner beauty that came out of her that Red saw. And you could see it as well, like on the screen, like through Andrea Riseborough, who, man, she really needs to get the time of the day. I really hope that people see this movie because she is fantastic in this movie. Nick Cage is fantastic. She just has like this quiet strength and like connection to the world around her. She tells this story about when she was a little girl, and there used to be starlings that used to fly around her home and stuff, and her father used to get upset because the starlings would eat the cherries off the cherry tree. And then later on, he came over to the kids with this bag and a crowbar, and this bag was moving because he'd caught all the starlings and filled them in the bag, and then he'd show the kids, and he was beating the bag and killing the starlings and giving all the other kids a turn, and then offered it to Mandy, and she started to cry and just ran away because she was shocked, you know, at what she was seeing. So it really goes Mandy's kind of her connection to the world around her and to nature. There's another scene where she wakes in bed hearing a noise, like an animal noise outside, and she goes out to investigate, and she's obviously upset. You know, you can see the look on her face. You know, she's concerned. You know, this is hard for her to hear. And she comes across a dead baby deer, and she stops to look at it, and she's just like transfixed by this poor baby deer that's dead on the ground, like in this green, like lush meadow, you know, beautiful trees and that around it, you know. And then the way Andrea plays it, like she looks at it and you can tell she's like emotionally distraught on the inside. Like she can't believe that something so good and pure, you know, is dead, is gone. And she's obviously upset, and she has like a single tear in that, you know, rolls down her face and over her nose. And to me, it just kind of felt like, yeah, Mandy was just like a symbol of goodness, you know, and purity, like I said. Possibly even an angel, I don't know. Like with the religious stuff, I find that a bit harder because that's not really kind of my background. But in saying that, Red as well, him being a lumberjack and kind of out in nature, you know, he has a connection to nature as well, even though his is a little more destructive. But I think that plays into the second half of the film as well. When Mandy and Red are together and they interact, there's a scene where they're in bed and they're talking about planets. Mandy talks about she's been reading a book, and Red's like, the big one, you know, kind of about, you know, all the planets and stuff. And he asks her, you know, what's your favorite planet? And Mandy and Red live in a house, and there are no real walls. There are walls, but none of it's enclosed. All the walls are all glass panes of windows, like all individual little square glass panes of windows. And it's like you can see out into the world, and you can see into their house. It's very transparent, and I feel like that goes back to Mandy being in touch with nature, and also kind of the transparency of their relationship, like between the two, how they're both very transparent with each other, and they can see into each other, and they know what each other's faults are, and they bolster and hold each other up. You know, there's no like secrets between them. They see each other completely and fully, and yet they're still so in love. There's a real like tenderness and real warmth and love to this movie, even though there's like horrible demon bikers and decapitations and all that sort of thing, the horror aspect of it. It really is just like this beautiful love story underneath all that. That's the crux of the entire movie, the love between these two people. And continuing on from the planet discussion, when they talk about it, the color starts to change. You see, going over Mandy's face, and red as well, there are all these pinks, these neon pinks and blues, and, because their roof is like see-through and stuff, and then once you go up, you see that there's like this big kind of, not Aurora Borealis, but kind of like this sky dancing red and pink and blue. There's something going on in the bloody sky, and it looks awesome. It's like straight out of a fantasy novel. But yeah, to me, when Red was with Mandy, it felt like a dream. Like Red was in a dream, and it was just bliss. And the way that was kind of represented, like with the color and the quiet and the music and just the conversations they had with each other, I thought it was beautiful. And that was just my interpretation. Like I say, all of this is just my interpretation. Interpretations are all subjective. Just because this is the way I read it doesn't mean it's wrong or right. I mean, I guess there's no definitive answer for anything. Unless Panos Cosmatos comes out and says, this is exactly what this scene means. This is what I meant. I mean, even then, people are still going to interpret things differently. I mean, that's what people have been doing for hundreds and thousands of years, We've just been everyone has their own opinion on something. Everybody interprets things differently, and this is just how I interpreted these things. There's another great scene between Red and Mandy. Mandy comes out of the water, and she's just like this. It's like she's a mermaid or a water nymph or an angel or something just coming out of the water, and she walks towards shore. She comes out of the water, and Red is looking at her through a fire that is lit, and she just stands on the other side of the fire. And the shots in the trailer, it's probably my favorite shot in the movie, where Andrea's standing there, and she's just like this porcelain skin, kind of like from the shoulders up, and she's looking down ever so slightly kind of into the fire, and then her eyes just gradually just lift up to stare down the barrel of the camera. And in the foreground, you just have all this flickering fire and that from the campfire in front, and it's just like this massive bitch of foreshadowing, like she's gonna burn and it ain't gonna be pretty, but like the beauty of her through the fire, and man, this movie really is something special. I think I want to talk about Jeremiah for a little bit. Jeremiah Sand. Now, Jeremiah is kind of the leader of this cult, the Children of the New Dawn, and it's him and like two lady followers and like 3 or 4 guys that are following. They can all pretty much nearly fit in a van. And it's kind of established in early scenes. We have kind of like the matriarch of the girls in the cult, and she is, concerned for Jeremiah, because this is just after he saw Mandy, and he's become transfixed by her, and he's laying on his bed just thinking about her, and this girl approaches him and says, what's wrong, Jeremiah? Have I done something wrong? What can I do to make you feel better? And the character that Jeremiah is, he's incredibly egocentric. Everything is about him. The entire world, the entire universe revolves around him, and I want to get back to that just a little bit later, going back to planets. But Jeremiah believes himself to be the most important, like, he is like the male ego personified on LSD, off his head, on drugs, And he threatens her in this scene. And he threatens her that she may not ascend if you're not with me. Because he senses like there's a little bit of doubt in her, or she isn't completely devoted. Because she knows he's interested in Mandy. And she doesn't like that. Obviously, she's a little bit jealous. So she says, she says something like, yes, she understands, or she's listening. And he gets real aggressive with her, and he's like, are you listening? And then he says the line, he's like, I'm worried if you're not with me, you may not ascend. He's like, you have to be with me. He's essentially saying to her, you have to be completely devoted to me. I sense that you're jealous, and there's a slight lack of devotion there. Regardless of what I do, or what I want, or what I say, your opinion doesn't matter. All you have to do is love me and focus on me. That is it. Because it's kind of like that cult mentality, isn't it, really? Cults really sort of bring in people that are kind of weak or weak-willed, or can't really find that, that personal satisfaction or gratification kind of on their own. They need to look up to kind of a loftier figure, who promises them more. They can be more. If you're with me, I can take you there. You can ascend. We can be better together. All you have to do is follow me and I will build you up. I will prop you up and you can be so much more. Now, Jeremiah is an interesting character because early on in the movie, he doesn't really, he makes a lot of references to, you think he's hinting at God. He never actually says it like in the first 3/4 of the movie, but kind of in his final scene, he does mention, God spoke to me, God said this. Essentially, in Jeremiah's mind, he says that God spoke to him and said, in his weakest moment, in his deepest, darkest moment, God spoke to him and said, everything is already yours. You can just go out and take what you want. Everything already belongs to you. If that's not a sign of a raging, deluded ego, I don't know what is. Because he's completely self-absorbed. I mean, we find out that he's a failed folk singer. And his album and the song that he plays in the movie is about himself. I think one of the lyrics are, Jeremiah Sand is a righteous man. And, he makes the line, like I said earlier, do you like the Carpenters? And you're like, oh, he's going to play some Carpenters. And he's like, I think they're sensational, but this is even better. And then he plays his own album. Again, the raging ego on Jeremiah Sand. He wears a gold cross as well, a religious symbol. Like I said, he doesn't hint at God, but, it's not really God speaking to him. People just hear what they want, kind of like in these cult situations and that, or if they feel like a higher being is speaking to them, that's not really a higher being speaking to them. That's their internal monologue. That's what they want. That's them using a deity figure to justify their own actions and their own wants and their own needs. And that's exactly what Jeremiah does in this movie. He's a really interesting character, and he comes across as being, kind of, I'm a prophet of God. I am this. God said I can take what I want because everything is mine. But really, at the end of the day, he's just a weak, inferior little man, which we see at the end of the movie when Red ultimately kills him. Red grabs him. He's all talk. He's all boasting that I am this, I am God's instrument, and all these things. But as soon as Red grabs him, he crumples down onto his knees and he starts to whimper and whinge and cry, please don't kill me, please don't kill me. Even offers fellatio to Red for him not to kill him, but then Red crushes his head anyway, and it's really cool. But Jeremiah also, he thinks of himself as this higher, being. Like I said, God spoke to him. And there's a scene, it's the Carpenter scene as well, where Mandy's drugged, and it's this drug-fueled daze of a scene. It goes on for quite a few minutes. But it's really transfixing as well. And the scene we see set up, Jeremiah's kind of sitting down in the background and all his followers are kind of like lounging about. They're kind of all laying down. It kind of looks like a groupie orgy situation thing. It's not very appealing. But, he gets up and walks around and it kind of just gives that distinction. He's the higher being and they're all below him. And he comes out and he's wearing this robe and kind of, you look at it kind of in passing and it looks more like, it's something really kind of regal and something like a religious figure would wear, like a priest or something like that. It looks like a priest's robe, It looks very impressive. But on my second watching of it, when I was watching that scene just earlier today, I watched the film for a second time, and I saw this robe, and I had a actually good look at it, and really, it just looks like a bathrobe. It's literally like a 70s bathrobe, which just has like these big kind of like wizard sleeves that kind of hang down and this kind of collar and stuff. And it looks very impressive and kind of like very religiously regal, like a priest would wear. But it really just looks like a cheesy 70s bathrobe that he's wearing. And he's trying to pass himself off as something greater, but really he's just like this pathetic guy wearing like a hotel bathrobe. And it's embarrassing. Like, it's kind of embarrassing. Now, I have read some other interpretations of that, but kind of the one for me, when Jeremiah has Red kind of tied up, he's chained with barbed wire, his wrists are bound kind of above him, and he has the barbed wire around his mouth. he comes over with his dagger and he makes this comment, you know what Jesus' problem was? He never made any sacrifices. And then he stabs Red in the ribs, kind of like as Jesus was stabbed. And this knife, it's a dagger, but, you could interpret it kind of looks like a spear tip, so it kind of comes back to that religious kind of iconography again. But for Red in this scene, like the barbed wire and that he has around his mouth kind of looks like the crown of thorns. And for me personally, you could even, I thought you could take it that one step further and him just left hanging there afterwards. It kind of looks kind of like a crucifixion, you could say, nearly. But there is a little bit more religious iconography for Red later on when one of his hands is nailed into the ground, which is kind of a bit of a giveaway. But Jeremiah really kind of, in my opinion, he kind of sees himself as like a bit of a Jesus character. And this kind of goes back to the planet conversation as well. Now, just me, this is my personal interpretation. This is kind of how I saw it, just chaining one thought to another. Whether it's right or wrong, this is kind of just what I thought, just chaining off it. When Red and Mandy are talking about the planets, Red asks Mandy what her favorite planet is, and she says Jupiter. Because it's like the surface is like like a raging storm, and the eye of the storm on Jupiter is big enough that it could swallow the Earth and all this sort of thing. And she asks Red what his favorite planet is, and he says Saturn, but then he changes his mind and he's like Galactus, obviously from the Fantastic Four. And she's like, Galactus isn't a planet. And he's like, yeah, but he eats planets. And then it got me thinking about Jeremiah, because Jeremiah kind of considers himself a Jesus character. Jesus, when he was born, was referred to light of the world. And there are some texts out there that have Jesus known as kind of a solar figure. And in matter of fact, the sun. Now, me just kind of like tying one thing to another, Red kind of, his favorite character is Galactus, or his favorite planet, or whatever. I prefer Galactus, eater of worlds. And Jeremiah sees himself as Jesus, light of the world. Jesus is kind of a solar figure in some texts, namely the sun. So Galactus eating the sun, a star, he's done it before. But yeah, that was kind of, another way that I kind of tied it back to that. But they were just running thoughts. Now, the Black Skulls, obviously the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It's pretty much a bit of a dead giveaway. I mean, they're called by... you think in the beginning of the film, because you don't know where it's going the first time you watch it, you think, oh, this is just kind of like a fantasy world, or a kind of a realistic world, but these guys are just going to summon demons, and then you find out that they were just, bikers who got a real bad batch of LSD, and it just drove them insane, and they kind of just took on, like, demon personas, after that, because they just went mad. So yeah, it's pretty safe to say, like, they'd be the four horsemen of the apocalypse, the four horsemen obviously ride around on horses, but kind of a modern update for that would be motorcycles. And so that's, that's kind of pretty easy to put that, put two and two together there. Now, like I was saying with the Red, there was kind of like the Jesus, the Christian symbolism, the crown of thorns being stabbed in the ribs, kind of like a crucifixion kind of thing, nail through the hand. And he makes at the end of the film, when he has his final confrontation with Jeremiah makes a comment about God. And then Red says to him, you're like, I'm your God now, and then crushes his head. Earlier in the film, when Red is hunting down the Black Skulls, and he's finished a few of them off, he takes a big hit of, like, cocaine that one of them was into. He picks up, like, this piece of broken glass and takes this big hit of cocaine, and then he goes over, and earlier in the film, when Brother Swan, I believe it was, summoned the Black Skulls, he offered them up this jar of kind of like this grey liquid, which he took, one of the Black Skulls took, and he just gulped it down, like gulp, 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 and he wanted more. And we see Red find a jar of the same stuff later in the movie, and he picks it up, and he kind of smells it, and he kind of just dips his finger in, and just touches it on his tongue. As soon as it impacts, he goes like instant psychotic hallucinations, where it's like Red as a Lost Ark wax figures, his entire face just like melts, like wax figure, it all just melts, and he has these visions of a radio tower, and then again, like where I was talking about the planets, Jeremiah, Jesus, the sun, Red Galactus, he has a vision of the sun as well after seeing the radio tower. So Red goes to the radio tower where he meets the chemist, the guy who makes all the drugs, and the chemist is there and he doesn't really wear any protective gear. He's dipping his hands and everything, and he kind of, he sucks some of the LSD off his fingers, and you've just got to imagine that this guy is in a state of constant drug-induced high. And he has a tiger there with him, which goes back to another piece of symbolism, because earlier in the film when Red is in the bathroom and he's got the vodka scene and the rage and the emotion and that, he's wearing like a baseball shirt, but it has a tiger's head on it, and we see the tiger in the cage, and the chemist lets the tiger free, and I'm like, is that symbolism for, Red just unleashing, kind of his inner fury, kind of his inner warrior, like letting the beast out? Or is that another way of saying, because Red did start off on the warpath, it wasn't until after he took the grey super LSD that he kind of had these visions and he unlocked this psychotic potential? So is that kind of like the chemist saying, I've unlocked your potential because that's the stuff I created and you took, I'm kind of responsible for that. I've let your tiger out of the cage, let your beast out, let your warrior out of the cage, to unleash upon these freaks. That was kind of another way I looked at it. Whether that's right or not, I don't bloody know. Red has a lot of dreams of Mandy after she's died. When he sleeps, he dreams of her, but they're animated sequences, which is actually really cool. And they're obviously very inspired by heavy metal. If anyone's seen the heavy metal film from the early 80s and the animation style that's in that, especially, I believe it's the Tana sequence toward the end, kind of like the warrior woman and stuff, the animation is very similar. It's very heavy metal inspired. So when Red first has the dream about her, she's kind of like dead and slightly rotted, and she's got bugs and worms and that crawling out of her. But as he goes along and he kills more of the followers and the children of the New Dawn and the Black Skulls, as he kind of gets toward his goal, the recurring dreams he has of Mandy, she gets better, her skin heals and she's more beautiful, her hair's flowing, and then the very last vision she has is like kind of like a tiger beast man, and she reaches in and pulls out like this jewel out of it. Now I guess that kind of goes back to the book she's reading at the beginning of the film, because she's reading the passage, it's in the trailer as well, something about a guy, and he reaches into the abyss and he pulls out this jewel, and he held it aloft and it glows with an emerald light, which obviously ties back into that. But we get to the end of the film, and after Nick's killed Jeremiah and he's killed all of them, he hasn't killed all of them actually, he spares Lucy, the youngest girl, who, obviously you could tell, she went along with all the cult stuff, but, she didn't really agree with it all, and he actually spares her, because Jeremiah offers her up earlier in the film, you think you and that whore of yours have love? He's like, I'll show you love. I'll show you how my followers love me. And he gives her a gun with one bullet in it and gets her to do Russian roulette. It doesn't go off, but that's not love, that's obsession. But anyway, at the end of the film, Nicolas Cage, he's taken all these drugs and he's taken this super LSD. I can only assume it's probably the same stuff that the chemist gave to these guys that drove them so insane. I mean, these guys were chugging big mouthfuls of it. And I mean, Nick Cage, Red, he only had just the tiny little drop on his finger, and he didn't even press it right on his tongue. He literally just touched it to his tongue, and it's like it unlocked his potential. He immediately had these hallucinations. So you got to imagine, we see that's what's done for him. You can only imagine what it did to these crazy bikers. But anyway, that's neither here or there. At the end of the film, Red's in the car and he's driving along, and we kind of have like this flashback to, it's in like a bar or a club, and Red's having a cigarette, and it's like the first meeting of Mandy and Red, and he's kind of with his head down having a cigarette, and she sees him, and then when he looks up at her, it's like that dream state washes over him again. Then the pink and the blue light washes over him, and they look at each other and they smile, and Red has a vision of seeing her in the car next to him. Like, he's completely clean, he's got no blood or anything on him, and he's kind of looking at her in the car, and he's normal, and it cuts to her, and then it cuts back to him, and you see him covered in blood and muck, and he's kind of got like this sadistic grin on his face, and then he looks forward and he drives off again, and then we see kind of like the forest, and then it bleeds into like a lunar kind of like moonscape with jagged mountains and rocks and two giant planets in the background. Maybe they are Jupiter and Saturn, but to me, the planet in the front didn't really look like Jupiter. I imagine it was, though, because it was quite a large planet, and Saturn is like a greyish blue, green, and they were kind of similar colours, so I imagine they're probably the two planets that they mentioned earlier in the film. But the ending to me was that I had a couple of different interpretations. Like, to begin with, when I originally watched it, I'm like, okay, he's kind of at peace now, and, you know, he kind of is just imagining her, like, it's all done, she's avenged, even though he'll never see her again. But, you know, is that kind of just the movie's way of kind of just tying it up for us and making us feel better? Or is that him after he's had this drug, the grey goo, like the highly concentrated super drug? And is that him just having hallucinations of her, you know, and he's happy, you know, but then it cuts back to reality and he's just covered in blood, you know? Is that his reality now? Is that how he sees it? Can he still go and live happily ever after, even if he's hallucinating and seeing her the whole time? I mean, she's there in the car with him. She's riding along next to him smoking, and he looks normal, but then we cut back to reality. Yeah, it's kind of hard. Like, it's these things that are really open for interpretation, so anyone can really take these any way they like. But, you know, a lot of those things, I know we were all over the place, but these were kind of just my interpretations of some of these things, whether they're right or wrong, or you disagree with me, or you want to abuse me and leave me comments, tell me how much of a fucking idiot I am for some of these things I've said. You know what? That's just what I thought. I really liked this movie, guys. I liked it when I first watched it, but then in the days after thinking about it, I really grew to love it. And when I watched it again the second time today, I just absolutely loved it. I loved it more on the second viewing. Like I said, just as a movie, like just watching it as a film with nothing extra, not going any deeper than the surface level of what I saw on the screen, I probably would have given it a 3.5 out of 5. But I love these movies that challenge me, that make me go away and research and look into things more deeply and try to find, you know, the meanings that these actors and the director and the writer and that put in there, like, that they wanted us to discover, you know. Because really, at the end of the day, this movie is about love and loss, you know, kind of like lost love. Because at the time of writing this, Panos Cosmatos, you know, he was dealing with the loss of his parents. Both of his parents had died, so he was dealing with that internally and kind of putting it onto the page. And then, you know, he started out as like a revenge film, but then it just felt natural for him, like, let's work in some fantasy elements here, and okay, now let's work in some horror elements, and all these things that he loved, you know, growing up. You know, you can see the inspiration in that there. You know, there's obviously like heavy metal albums, Heavy Metal Magazine, you know, some of Mandy's artwork in that is like straight up like Frank Frazetta inspired, and some of the landscapes in that, like the end shot could have, like, Frank Frazetta could have done that, you know, with like Barbarian Warrior and stuff in front. You know, so I love films like this, and I really like this one. I'd probably honestly say this is, yeah, definitely top 5 films of the year. It'll be interesting to see how I feel when I get to the our Best of 2018 episode in a few weeks, and see how I still feel about it. With still a few great movies to watch before the year's out, so we'll see how that goes. But yeah, I really love the movie. If I had to give it a rating, I'd give it 5 out of 5. But again, that is my personal interpretation. Obviously, all views are subjective. These were just mine. If you listened and you got all the way to the end through all my inane fucking ramblings, then thank you. Thank you for sticking in and listening. I'd really love to hear anyone else's interpretation. If you want to comment below or whatever, please go ahead, because I would love to talk about this film more, and I would love to hear different point of views And yeah, just tell me what you think. Tell me what you thought of the film, what you thought of these particular scenes, whether we synced up or not, or you had a different opinion, on a lot of these things. Tell me. Like, I want to talk about this film more. Yeah, I loved it. It's not a film for everyone. It definitely isn't, but I loved it. And yeah, I'd give it a 5 out of 5. It was, one of my favorites of the year so far. So I think I'll wrap that up there, guys. Just again, thank you for listening if you got so far in and you made it here to the end with me, because, I really wanted to talk about this movie, but then I wanted to go a little bit deeper and just try to give my interpretations. It is a bit rambly, but I hope that's okay with you guys. You guys don't mind. But thank you for listening. I've been Jages. If you want to find the Bearded Geeks, Facebook, iTunes, SoundCloud, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, TeePublic. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you next week on the Bearded Geeks. Hey.